I never imagined there would come a day when I would sit down in silence, let the world fall away, and finally speak words I have been avoiding for years. It's strange how a moment can feel both heavy and delicate at the same time, like holding a piece of cold glass that you're afraid might shatter if you grip it too hard. As I sit here, I can feel something tightening in my chest, not in fear, but in acknowledgement that I am standing at the edge of a chapter one never prepared for, a chapter that demands honesty, humility, and a kind of courage that few people ever talk about. People often see me as someone who stands above uncertainty, someone who walks into the unknown with effortless confidence. They see the results, the achievements, the milestones, but not the quiet moments in between, the moments when even I feel unsure of what comes next. Normally, when I speak, it's with a sense of direction, a vision of what lies beyond the horizon, a confidence in ideas that have not yet been built. But today is different. Today is not about what's ahead. Today is about what must be left behind. Before I go further, let me ask you something directly, quietly, personally. Have you ever found yourself standing in front of a goodbye you didn't want, but knew was necessary? A goodbye to a person you loved deeply, a dream you once carried like fire, a place that shaped you, or even a version of yourself that no longer fits who you are becoming. If you've ever felt that moment, truly felt it, then you already understand the weight I'm holding right now. Not the weight of loss, but the weight of letting go. This is not a memory. This is not a story told after the storm has passed. This is happening now. This moment, these words, you are hearing them as I am living them. There is no script, no blueprint, no rehearsed lines. Just truth. It's strange, isn't it? How life can feel so predictable one moment, and then, with no warning, present you with a door you never expected. A door that demands to be opened, even if you have no idea what's on the other side. And yet, you know you have to walk through it. You feel it in your chest, in the quiet corners of your mind that you usually ignore until they start speaking louder than your logic. That's exactly where I am right now. One foot planted in the familiar, the other hovering above unfamiliar soil. My mind searching for reasons to stay where it's safe, while something deeper, something instinctive, whispers that it's time to move. But don't mistake this for sadness. It isn't. This is clarity. This is truth arriving without apology. A moment that comes to every person eventually. The moment you must decide what matters most and what must be released. Letting go doesn't feel natural. We are wired to hold on, to preserve what once gave us strength, to protect what once felt irreplaceable. But there is a moment in every life when holding on becomes heavier than letting go, when the past begins to feel tighter than the future, when staying still feels more dangerous than stepping forward. I've carried this moment in silence for far too long. Silence can be a shelter, but it can also be a prison. And carrying a truth inside your chest is like carrying a stone. It grows heavier, colder, sharper, until you either speak it or let it break you. So I'm speaking it. And I want you to understand that what you're hearing right now is not just a story, it's a turning point. Not a fall, not a failure, not a collapse, but a turning, a shift. The kind of shift that quietly changes the entire direction of a life. There's uncertainty here, of course. There's fear too, the quiet kind, the kind you feel in your bones before you feel it in your mind. But there is also hope, a hope that feels strangely calm, like the first breath after a long night. In a moment, I will tell you exactly what this goodbye means. But first, I want you to understand the feeling. The feeling of standing at the threshold of a new chapter, unable to take the step, but unable to walk away either. The feeling of a heart that knows what must be done, even if the mind keeps searching for excuses not to. This moment, this precise, fragile, indescribable moment, is where growth begins. Let me tell you something I've learned over the years. Goodbyes are not reserved for endings. Goodbyes are the architects of change. They clear space. They open doors. They reveal parts of you that cannot appear while you're still holding on to what no longer serves you. And right now, I am standing in that space, between what was and what could be, between comfort and evolution, between identity and transformation. I'm not speaking as someone above the world. I'm speaking as someone inside it. Someone who has felt the weight of responsibility, the pressure of expectations, the cost of ambition. Someone who has built futures, created paths, shaped possibilities, only to realize that sometimes the boldest future you can create is the one where you step back. Because there comes a moment, a defining, quiet, unavoidable moment, when you must ask yourself, am I holding on because this is still my path, or because I'm afraid of who I might become without it? That question has been echoing inside me for months. A whisper at first, then a tap on the shoulder, then a voice I could no longer ignore. And the answer, though painful, is clear. I must let go. Not out of weakness, not out of exhaustion, not out of fear, but out of truth. I am not losing anything. I am making space for what must come next. And so this moment, the moment you are hearing, is not the sound of something ending. It is the sound of something beginning. There is a quiet moment that arrives in every journey, a moment where you stop looking at the world outside and finally turn your attention inward. It doesn't come loudly. It doesn't demand permission. It slips in like soft light through a half-open window, illuminating everything you've tried to ignore. That's where I found myself, caught between the person I used to be and the person I was becoming, unsure which version deserved to stay. For a long time, I tried to move forward without confronting the weight I carried. I convinced myself that progress meant speed, that growth meant movement, that success meant never stopping to question the cost. But the truth is, the biggest transformations do not happen while you're running. They happen when you finally stop. Stopping felt unnatural at first. I've lived most of my life in forward motion, pushing, building, evolving, surviving. But when the noise around you becomes too familiar, too predictable, something inside begins to stir. A small voice you've ignored for too long begins to grow, and suddenly you can't silence it anymore. That voice was telling me something simple, something I didn't want to hear. You are not where you belong anymore. It wasn't a judgment. It wasn't a failure. It was simply a truth rising to the surface. And truths, real truths, do not fade when you look away. They wait. As I sat with that realization, I felt both exposed and liberated. It's strange how clarity can feel like both a wound and a cure. I realized I had built so much of my life around expectations, my own and everyone else's, that I forgot to make space for evolution. We often think growth means adding more, reaching further, expanding endlessly. But sometimes growth means releasing. It means loosening your grip on chapters you've outgrown. It means walking away from rooms where your spirit has already left, even if your body stayed out of habit. It means trusting that the path ahead, though unfamiliar, holds something you were never meant to miss. The more I listened, the more I understood that change doesn't begin when you move. It begins the moment you admit something needs to change. That admission alone is a doorway. And once you step through it, you cannot return to who you were before. It's like waking up after years of being half asleep. The colors are sharper. The silence is louder. The truth is clearer. You begin to see not just where you are, but where you must go. And though the journey ahead is uncertain, there is a calmness in finally acknowledging it, a peace that comes from no longer pretending. That is where I am now, standing in a space between identities, between paths, between versions of myself. And for the first time, I'm not rushing to fill the silence. I'm letting it speak, letting it guide me, letting it show me what I refused to see before. Because sometimes life doesn't push you forward. Sometimes it waits for you to notice what you've been avoiding. And the moment you do, everything begins to shift quietly, naturally, inevitably. This shift, this awakening, is not the end of my story. It is the beginning of one I was finally ready to write. There comes a point when you begin to understand that life is not defined by the noise you create, but by the silence you learn to hold. I reached that point slowly, almost reluctantly, like someone opening their eyes after a long sleep they weren't ready to leave. The world around me hadn't changed. The deadlines, the expectations, the responsibilities were all still there, lined up like shadows waiting to reclaim their place. But something within me shifted. It was subtle at first, a small fracture in the rhythm I had lived with for years. Yet fractures, if ignored, become openings. And through that opening, a new awareness began to flow. I started noticing the things I used to overlook, the heaviness in my own chest, the exhaustion disguised as routine, the loneliness hiding beneath productivity, the longing I kept buried under ambition. These feelings weren't new, they had been whispering for years. I just never allowed myself the stillness to hear them fully. But when life slows just enough, when the distance between your past and your present becomes undeniable, every suppressed truth begins to rise. And once they rise, you realize how much living you postponed in the name of purpose. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to question the path I was on, not out of regret, but out of honesty. Why was I still holding on to chapters that no longer fed my spirit? Why was I devoting myself to roles that drained me more than they shaped me? Why was I trying to stay unchanged in a world that transforms every day? I realized then that I wasn't afraid of losing my old self. I was afraid of facing the version of me that had been waiting on the other side of change, the version who demanded truth, depth, and alignment, the version who wouldn't settle for anything less than authenticity. As the questions grew louder, something unexpected happened. I felt a sense of calm instead of fear, a quiet confidence, like standing at the edge of the unknown and realizing that falling and flying often feel the same at first. I began to understand that evolution isn't about abandoning who you were. It's about finally honoring who you've grown into. There is a profound kind of freedom in accepting that the person you used to be has served their purpose. They fought the battles you couldn't avoid, carried the weight you couldn't drop, survived moments you weren't ready to face. But their chapter is ending now, and endings are not failures, they are invitations. This realization didn't arrive with a dramatic moment or sudden clarity. It unfolded slowly, like a sunrise you don't notice until the world around you is already bright. And in that slow illumination, I discovered something I had forgotten. The right path doesn't always feel comfortable, but it always feels honest. And honesty, once embraced, becomes a compass. It points you toward places you didn't know you needed and away from places that once felt necessary. It teaches you that the greatest transformations happen quietly, not in the spotlight, but in the private spaces where only you can see the truth. Now, as I stand deeper into this transition, I feel a sense of alignment I haven't felt in years. Not because everything is clear, but because I finally stopped pretending. I finally stopped resisting the shift. I finally stopped trying to force myself into a space my spirit had already left. And in that surrender, I found a clarity stronger than certainty, a clarity rooted in acceptance. Acceptance that the old version of me is fading gently, and the new version is rising with purpose, patience, and quiet strength. This is not the end of the journey. This is the moment the real journey finally begins. The more I leaned into this shift, the more I realized how much of my life had been shaped by momentum rather than intention. I had spent years moving forward simply because forward was the only direction I knew. But when you finally pause long enough to breathe, to feel, to listen, you begin to understand that momentum and purpose are not the same thing. Momentum pushes you because of where you've been. Purpose pulls you because of where you're meant to go. And somewhere in between those two forces, I found myself standing, questioning which one had been guiding me all this time. It's difficult to admit that you've outgrown environments you once fought to enter. It feels almost disloyal, like betraying a past version of yourself who tried so hard to belong. But growth has no loyalty to stagnation. It doesn't care about the hours you invested, the sacrifices you made, or the identities you built along the way. Growth cares only about truth, the truth of who you are now, not who you pretended to be then. And when truth arrives, it arrives with a clarity that strips away every excuse you used to hide behind. It tells you, unmistakably, that you cannot keep living in spaces your soul has already walked away from. As I began letting go of certain expectations, I noticed the weight I had been carrying wasn't just heavy, it was familiar. And familiarity can feel safe, even when it's suffocating. We hold on to routines, roles, relationships, and identities not because they are right for us, but because they are known. The unknown, no matter how promising, threatens the quiet equilibrium we've clung to. But staying small to avoid uncertainty is a slow kind of self abandonment. I didn't want that for myself anymore. I didn't want to keep shrinking to fit into chapters that no longer aligned with who I was becoming. What surprised me most was how natural the act of releasing began to feel. It didn't come with dramatic emotion or sudden upheaval. It came like the gentle closing of a door behind you, the kind you don't even realize has shut until you find yourself in a new room, breathing differently. With every layer I released, expectations, pressures, unspoken obligations, I began to sense something underneath that had been buried for too long, my own clarity. Not the clarity shaped by others, not the clarity forced by responsibility, but the clarity that emerges when you finally stop resisting your own evolution. And in that clarity, I discovered a truth I had ignored for years. Not every chapter is meant to last. Not every version of you is built for the future you're stepping into. Some versions were created only to help you survive the storms that once threatened to break you. But when the storms pass, when the sky clears, when the air becomes still again, you must be willing to release those versions with gratitude. They served you, they protected you, but they cannot walk with you into the next season. That is not abandonment, that is transition, that is growth in its purest form. Now, as I look forward, I am not rushing. I am not chasing. I am not carrying the weight of who I used to be. I am simply allowing myself to transform quietly and intentionally. Because the person I'm becoming is not born from pressure, nor from expectation, but from awareness. Awareness of what matters, awareness of what doesn't, awareness of the path that feels right, even if it's unfamiliar. And this awareness is not loud, it is steady, it is calm, it is the kind of clarity that doesn't demand attention, but simply guides you forward one honest breath at a time. There is a moment in every transformation when you stop looking back entirely. Not because the past doesn't matter anymore, but because it finally settles into its rightful place as something that shaped you, not something that defines you. I reached that moment gently, almost without realizing it. It happened on an ordinary day, in the middle of an ordinary hour, when I noticed that the weight I used to carry had grown lighter, not because it disappeared, but because I no longer felt obligated to hold it. The past was still there, but it no longer gripped me by the collar. It no longer dictated how I breathed, how I moved, how I existed. It had become a reference, not a prison. With that shift came a new understanding. We spend so much of our lives trying to repair old versions of ourselves, trying to fix mistakes we made years ago, trying to rewrite chapters that were meant to end. But healing isn't about editing your past, it's about evolving beyond it. The person I used to be didn't need perfection, they needed grace. They needed patience. They needed acknowledgement. And slowly, I learned to give them that. I stopped blaming myself for choices made with limited clarity. I stopped punishing myself for moments when I didn't know better. I stopped carrying guilt for things that simply belonged to another phase of my life. Growth is not born from regret, it's born from acceptance. And as acceptance settled in, something else emerged: direction. A quiet, steady sense of where I was meant to go next, even if the road ahead was still blurry. I realized that clarity doesn't always come as a fully formed map. Sometimes it arrives as a single step, a subtle pull, a whisper that says, "Trust this. Move here. Start now." And that whisper becomes stronger the more you honor it. Life doesn't reveal its plan all at once. It reveals it through motion, through courage, through the willingness to walk even when you can't see the entire path. I began to trust that process, not blindly, but consciously. But trust doesn't come without its challenges. There were days when doubt returned, quietly but firmly, questioning my choices, pointing me back toward old comfort zones that no longer fit. There were moments when I felt the temptation to retreat into familiarity, to rebuild walls I had just taken down, to shrink into versions of myself that required less courage. But every time I looked back, I also remembered how empty those spaces had begun to feel, how disconnected I had become from my own spirit when I tried to remain in places my heart had already left. And that memory alone was enough to keep me moving forward. The path ahead may not be perfect, but it feels aligned. And alignment, I've learned, is far more valuable than certainty. Certainty demands control. Alignment requires trust. Certainty seeks guarantees. Alignment embraces possibility. And it is possibility, not perfection, that fuels real growth. The kind of growth that expands your vision, strengthens your spirit, and reconnects you with the life you were meant to live rather than the life you were conditioned to maintain. Now, as I continue stepping into this new chapter, I'm learning to hold my future the way I once held my past, gently, without pressure, without fear. I'm allowing myself to imagine without limitation, to dream without hesitation, to build without the old weight pulling at my foundation. The next version of me isn't driven by urgency. It's built through intention, through patience, through presence. And in that presence, I'm discovering a deeper truth. The life I'm stepping into isn't just new, it's mine. Fully, honestly, unapologetically mine. And as I traveled further into this quiet turning point, I began to understand something I had never allowed myself to see before. Letting go is not a single decision. It is a continuous practice, a slow release, a daily unlearning. Each morning I woke up feeling a little different, as if a small piece of me had shifted while I slept, rearranging itself into a new pattern made for the life ahead of me, not the one behind. Some days the shift was gentle, barely noticeable, like a softened breath. Other days, it felt like my entire world had tilted, forcing me to find new balance in a space where old habits had no place to stand. But that is the nature of growth. It doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds in layers, each one revealing another piece of who you're becoming. I started to see that the fear of change was never really about the future. It was about identity, about losing the version of myself I had invested so many years constructing. We all cling to who we've been because it gives us something familiar to hold, even when that version of ourselves no longer reflects the person we are becoming. But there comes a moment when holding on feels heavier than letting go, when the comfort of what we know becomes more suffocating than the uncertainty of what comes next. I reached that moment quietly, without a dramatic realization, without a grand awakening, just a simple understanding that I was ready. Ready to step beyond the boundaries I had once believed were necessary for survival. The truth is, the more I stepped back, the more I saw clearly. The more I released control, the more I found peace. I had spent years standing at the center of everything, believing that leadership meant being everywhere, doing everything, carrying the weight of every decision. But as I loosened my grip, I realized leadership is not about being irreplaceable. It's about building something that can thrive without you. It's about trusting that the seeds you planted, the values you shared, the vision you shaped will continue to grow even when you are no longer the gardener tending every leaf. And strangely enough, That realization brought me a calm I had never felt before. It was the calm that comes from knowing you no longer have to fight every battle alone. In that calm, I found myself rediscovering parts of life I had neglected: quiet moments, slow mornings, simple conversations. I began to reclaim the fragments of humanity I had set aside in the name of ambition. The world had been so loud for so long that I had forgotten what silence even felt like. But now that I could hear it again, I realized how deeply I needed it. Silence wasn't emptiness, it was clarity. It was the space where understanding finally had room to breathe. It was where the noise of expectation faded and the truth of who I was becoming finally had a voice. And as that voice grew clearer, another realization followed. The future I am stepping into does not require the same armor I once wore. I don't need the constant tension, the constant urgency, the constant demand to achieve. I don't need to prove anything to anyone, not anymore. What I need now is alignment, a path that flows instead of fights, a life that breathes instead of suffocates, a purpose rooted not in pressure, but in presence. For the first time in a long time, I'm allowing myself to imagine a life built not from obligation, but from intention. A life where growth isn't forced, it unfolds naturally. Where ambition doesn't drain, it inspires. Where success isn't about the weight I carry, but the meaning I create. And in this unfolding, I've come to see something deeper still. Goodbyes are not walls, they're thresholds. They don't close doors, they open new ones. They don't end your story, they allow a new chapter to begin. And the chapter ahead of me, the one I am slowly walking into, feels different from anything I've known before. It feels grounded, balanced, whole. It feels like a place where I don't have to run to matter or exhaust myself to be enough. It feels like a place where my life finally returns to me, piece by piece, breath by breath. This continuation is not just about the goodbye. It's about everything that becomes possible because of it. It's about the rediscovery of peace, the rebuilding of identity, and the quiet courage it takes to step into a future without dragging your past behind you. And as I move further into this new horizon, I realize something that changes everything. The life I am creating now is not a replacement for what once was. It is an evolution, a refinement, a rising. But even as I step deeper into this new clarity, I can't ignore the quiet truth that letting go reshapes you in ways you don't recognize at first. It changes the way you think, the way you breathe, the way you understand your own presence in the world. For so long, I lived inside a rhythm that never paused, an endless pursuit of the next milestone, the next breakthrough, the next impossible goal. I believed that constant motion was the only way forward, that slowing down was the same as falling behind. But as I move further into this transition, I'm beginning to understand that life isn't meant to be a single unbroken sprint. It's a series of seasons, and some seasons demand movement, while others demand stillness. And in this season of stillness, I'm learning something I never expected to find. There's a profound strength in stepping back, a strength that doesn't come from achieving or conquering, but from acknowledging that not every part of your life can be held with the same intensity forever. Some chapters require your fire, others require your surrender. And surrender, surprisingly, is not defeat, it's wisdom. It's the wisdom of knowing that holding on too long can turn even the brightest purpose into a burden. It's the understanding that sometimes the most courageous act is not pushing forward, but stepping aside and allowing life to redirect you gently and quietly toward a new horizon. In these quieter moments, I've started to see the life I had been missing all these years. Small things, ordinary things, things I once walked past without noticing because my mind was always running ahead of me. The taste of a slow morning, the ease of a conversation without rushing, the comfort of sitting still long enough to actually hear your own thoughts. I hadn't realized how rare such moments had become. I hadn't realized how deeply I needed them. And as they return to me, one by one, I can feel parts of myself softening, parts that had been hardened by years of pressure, responsibility, and expectation. And maybe that's the quiet gift hidden inside every goodbye, the chance to feel human again, to reconnect with the version of yourself that existed before the world demanded so much. The version that wasn't defined by work or success or the endless weight of responsibility. The version that still knew how to breathe, how to hope, how to rest without guilt. Letting go has made space for that version of me to return, not as someone weaker, but as someone whole. But even as I regain this new sense of balance, I also understand that walking away from a life of constant momentum doesn't happen without turbulence. There are days when the old instincts return, days when I feel the urge to take control again, to run back into the chaos because the silence feels unfamiliar. That's the thing about goodbyes. They test you, they stretch you, they reveal every part of you that isn't ready. And on those days, when the pull of the past feels stronger than the promise of the future, I remind myself why this goodbye matters. I remind myself that peace is not something you discover, it's something you choose again and again. And with each choice, I'm learning that the world doesn't collapse when you let go. The people you trusted continue to rise. The work continues to thrive. The vision continues to grow without your hands gripping every corner. And seeing that happen, not because I pushed, but because I stepped back, has given me a deeper sense of fulfillment than any milestone ever did. Because it means the mission was never about me alone. It means the legacy is bigger than the man who started it. And in that realization, I find relief. I find pride. I find peace. So as this chapter unfolds, I'm no longer running from the goodbye. I'm walking with it. I'm allowing it to shape me, to teach me, to guide me. And with each step forward, I feel a little lighter, a little clearer, a little more aligned with the life I'm meant to live now. A life where I'm not defined by what I control, but by what I allow to grow. A life where the future doesn't feel like a battlefield, but a horizon, open, wide, waiting. This is the continuation of my goodbye. Not a collapse, not a retreat, but an evolution, a deliberate shift into a new space where I can finally breathe freely. And as I move toward that space, I'm beginning to understand something profound. Sometimes the version of you that emerges after the goodbye is the version that was waiting your whole life to be born. That it's okay to let others lead. That it's okay to be a person again, not a machine built for expectation. And slowly, day by day, that quiet voice grows stronger, guiding me out of the shadows of my old self and into the light of a life I never allowed myself to imagine. Letting go doesn't just change your direction, it changes your reflection. As I remove myself from the center of everything, I'm seeing my life with a clarity that success never allowed. I'm realizing how many moments I rushed through, how many people I barely saw, how many sunsets and conversations and memories slipped by unnoticed because my mind was always racing toward the next important thing. And now, with the pace of my life slowing, I can feel those missed moments catching up to me, not to haunt me, but to remind me what I still have time to reclaim. Because that's the beauty of letting go. It doesn't erase your past, it frees your future. This goodbye, as difficult as it was to accept, has opened a doorway into a version of life that feels richer, deeper, more honest than anything I've known before. A life where silence isn't a threat, but a companion, a life where presence matters more than performance. A life where I can finally hear my own heartbeat without it being drowned out by the noise of responsibility. It's strange, really, how stepping back from the world can make everything inside you come alive again. How the absence of constant pressure can create space for thoughts you never had time to think. How letting go of the role you once believed defined you can reveal a purpose that feels more authentic than anything you chased before. Maybe that's the quiet truth behind every goodbye. It isn't about leaving something behind. It's about returning to something essential, something you lost along the way, something you didn't realize was missing until life forced you to stop and look inward. This transition, this letting go, this gentle unraveling of old identities, it has shown me that the greatest transformation doesn't happen when you achieve more. It happens when you choose to need less. When you choose clarity over chaos. When you choose self-understanding over self-sacrifice. When you choose yourself without apology. So here I stand, no longer the person who believed he had to control everything, no longer the person defined by pressure, no longer the person afraid of slowing down. Instead, I feel like someone rediscovering the world with new eyes. Someone learning how to live again, not as a symbol or a leader or a role, but as a human being. Someone who finally understands that stepping back is not stepping down. It is stepping into a different, deeper kind of strength. A strength that doesn't ask the world to move. It allows the world to move without resistance. And as this chapter draws to a close, I'm beginning to see that the goodbye wasn't the hard part. The hard part was admitting I needed it. The hard part was choosing to honor my own humanity instead of my own legend. The hard part was trusting that the world would continue spinning even if I stopped running. But now that I've taken that step, Now that I've released the weight I carried for so long, I feel something I haven't felt in years: freedom. Not the freedom that comes from success, not the freedom that comes from achievement, but the freedom that comes from finally letting yourself be whole. This is the final stretch of my journey through goodbye, a journey that has reshaped me, stripped me down, rebuilt me from the inside out. And though I don't know exactly what comes next, for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of the unknown. I'm ready for it. I'm open to it. I'm stepping toward it with a steady heart and a clear mind. Because this goodbye has taught me the most important truth I've ever learned: that the future doesn't always require you to fight. Sometimes it simply asks you to let go, trust the path, and walk forward, one calm, honest step at a time. In the end, we all outgrow versions of ourselves we once fought to protect. And when you finally let go, you don't fall apart, you fall into place.